Good evening. I hope that everyone had a nice time off last week. I had a good time on my vacation, but I'm glad to be back as well. Tonight, I want to talk about, whenever you watch these videos, I want to talk about three, actually four different religions: Sikhism, Shinto, Confucianism, and Taoism. So we begin with Sikhism. We're going to talk about the teachings of Sikhism. Sikh means disciple. That's exactly what it means. It just simply means a disciple. And the Sikhs are disciples of the 10 gurus. There were 10 gurus in this particular religion. The most revered, if you will, was Guru Nanak, Nanak, and those 10 ended with Guru Gobind Singh, Guru Gobind, new word Singh, Gobind Singh. And even though those gurus were always known to Hinduism, because there were always gurus in the Hindu faith, for Sikhism, the gurus were different. Each guru, according to Sikhism, is a teacher of God's will. Okay? Sikhs believe that God reveals his grace through the gurus. So if that's the case, we'll start with Guru Nanak, Nanak. He was born in an area that we now know as modern Pakistan. He came to believe in a oneness of God and how we as human beings need to get closer to God through meditation and through the singing of hymns of praise to God. And in fact, Nanak wrote a lot of hymns. He wrote many hymns. At the age of 30, he became a follower, and he proclaimed from the age of 30 on that there is neither Hindu and there is no Muslim. There is only one God. Okay? He spent the next several decades learning about things and learning from other religions, especially Muslims and Hindus and Jains. He continued to proclaim his belief in monotheism or one God, and he found no distinction. Now, this is really interesting. Even in the place where it was developed, that he saw no distinction between the caste or gender or creed. In truth, Nanak only called for, if you will, good deeds, doing good things. At the age of 50, he developed his first community in Pakistan, and he erected and built a place for worship. He saw also that providing food for the poor and providing food for the people was extremely important. So he worked at what he saw as a community kitchen known as a langar, Langar, a community kitchen in which they served other people, especially those who could not afford food. Followers believed the guru was not divine, not necessarily, but they believed the guru, especially Nanak, was spiritually advanced. Now, his death was on September the 22nd, 1539. Now, when he was buried, he told his followers, he said, just go ahead and bury me, and if certain flowers grow up on one side of my grave, that means that the Muslims are right. If flowers grow up on the other side of the grave, that means the Hindus are right. And when they went back to look the next day, there were flowers on both sides of his grave, so they knew that Nanak must have been somewhere down the middle of those two. Let's talk about the scriptures that we might find in Sikhism. The Adi Granth, Adigranth, is the most sacred text in Sikhism. It was compiled by Guru Arjan, Arjan, somewhere between 1603 and 1604. And it contains the works of four predecessors, along with some of his own hymns and some of his own poems. And what's interesting about this this Adi Granth is that every copy of the Adi Granth is exactly the same. It is identical. The scripts and the page numbers are all the same from one book to another. For Sikhs, the Adi Granth is most brilliant when it's placed to music, which I think is very interesting. There is also the Dasam Granth, D-A-S-A-M, capital G-R-A-N-T-H, and it's normally attributed to Guru Gobind Singh, but it was not officially authorized until 1902. Then there is the Rahit, the last, if you will, of the sacred scriptures, or the sacred parts of Sikhism. The Rahit, R-A-H-I-T, is a collection of teachings, although they never reached the level of the Adi Granth. So for a second, let's talk about some of the teachings of Sikhism. They believe there's one God. It is a monotheistic religion. God is one. And he is self-existent, or I shouldn't say God is eternal, God is self-existent, God is creator. One God without form. And here's why I couldn't say he, and he's also without gender. Sikhs work not to give God good human characteristics. They say there is only one God. But God is not only the creator of all things, God is the preserver of all things, and eventually God will be the destroyer of all things. God, according to the Sikhs, is distinct from creation, but also dwells in creation. So therefore, it is possible, according to Sikhs, for humans to make contact with God and also to become known, or to come to know God. So what's the human condition here? What's causing all the problems? Self-centeredness. That is the sin, the biggest sin according to Sikhism. Advocate kindness is one of the things they propose. To be kind toward all living things. But they also believe that these things that are out there are here, especially the creatures out there, are here to provide for us. Sikhs are not opposed to eating meat, but most of them are vegetarians. The Sikhs believe that God dwells in human beings, and God is actively concerned with the spiritual welfare of human beings, not so that they don't neglect their need to center on God. The Sikh word for self-centeredness is Havmai, Havmi. The Sikh word for self-centeredness is Havmi, and it is dominated by 5 vices, which we will learn are pretty much vices found in all the religions we talk about. The first is lust, anger, greed, attachment, and pride. And as long as the Havmi and the 5 vices persist, human beings are destined to remain in samsara. They do believe in samsara. They do believe in the recycle of life. They do believe in that cyclical life that people go through, that wheel of life. Life, death, birth, life, death, birth, the ideal of reincarnation. Spiritual liberation comes through a union with God. Akal, A-K-A-L, capital P-U-R-K-A-H, is in God. We as Christians might consider it to be like the Holy Spirit, which is a part of God, which lives in people. They believe the Akal Prakha is in people, showing them the potential for truth, and therefore allowing people to understand and to see God. Through humbling oneself and denying Havmi, or those 5 things that we talked about, a person is open to God's grace. Once received, the person then is to respond with loving devotion to God through meditation. Then there is the mukti, M-U-K-T-I, which means liberation. It brings that person into an eternal bliss in the presence of God. And reaching that place of eternal bliss is not dependent on caste, and it's not dependent on gender. So let's talk about the teachings of Guru Singh and the Ghalsa, Khalsa. There are 4 cardinal prohibitions, things you just cannot do. You cannot cut your hair. You cannot cut one's hair. The second is eating meat not properly slaughtered is prohibited. Engaging in extramarital sex. Now, it doesn't say anything about premarital sex, just engaging in extramarital sex. Using tobacco products. Then there are the 5 Ks. Kes, K-E-S. It means uncut hair. The Kanga, K-A-N-G-H-A, is a small comb worn in the hair to represent or to be a sign of cleanliness. There is the Kara, or a steel wristlet that's connected to God. There is the Kirpan, which is a small sword, which is a sign of devotion to God. And then there is the Kach, K-A-C-H-H, which is a pair of shorts with a drawstring, which is a sign of chastity. Let's talk a little bit about the history of Sikhism. Guru Nanak and his 9 successors were revealers of the truth, and they shared the divine essence, if you will, according to Sikhs. Arjan, A-R-A-J-A-N, is the 5th guru, and he compiled scriptures that would later become the Adi Granth, most important and sacred scriptures in Sikhism. He also went on to build a golden temple, and it became this geographical center of life for Sikhs. Guru Gobind Singh, we mentioned his name a little while ago. He was portrayed as a contemplative as well as one who was always ready for battle, which seems kind of a far stretch for me to go from one way to the other. He grew Sikh militarism, and he engaged in several conflicts. But he also founded the Khalsa, Khalsa, or a community of pure ones. Sikhism has always been a religion in search of a nationhood. Sikhs are now they're looking to establish their own national identity, and that causes a lot of conflict, especially for the people that they're living around. Sikhs are right now scattered throughout the world. In fact, over 2 million Sikhs live outside of the Punjab and India. They live in different cultures, and when they live in different cultures, it causes a lot of conflict, especially when it comes to the 5 Ks. But let's talk about Sikhism as a way of life. They believe in daily devotions and practices. Important is the Nam Simran, capital N-A-M-S-I-M-A-R-A-N, which is a remembrance of the name of God. They sing hymns and contemplative meditations toward God and on God. Daily prayers are very important to Sikhs, and they're part of their devotion. Sikhs also worship in the Gurdwara, G-U-R-D-W-A-R-A, G-U-R-D-W-A-R-A, the Gurdwara, which is really literally means the gateway to the gurus. Any building, and reemphasize, any building that contains a copy of the Adi Granth is technically a worship area. It is a Gurdwara, or a Sikh house of worship. Other than the Adi Granth sitting on a pillow, which I think is very interesting, it sits on a pillow under a canopy. But after that, there are no restrictions, there are no requirements on what it's supposed to look like on the rest of the interior. Worship for Sikhs has no particular day or time. Evenings are preferred basically because they've usually been gone to battle most of the time before going to worship. And for them, worship consists of singing, reading the Adi Granth, and storytelling by one of the gurus. And finally, there is the sharing of the Kara Prasad, Karh, new word, capital Prasad, which is a special pudding that everybody eats. Interesting. Let's talk about their birth and the naming of children. Babies' names are given by going to the house of worship. Okay? The Adi Granth is opened up and the child's name is chosen based on the first letter that appears on the left-hand page of the scripture. That's a very interesting way of naming a baby, right? For girls, they are also given the name Kaur, Kaur. For boys, they are given the name Singh, as well as their other name. They also believe that tying the turban is a really, really big rite of ritual, rite of passage for children. At a certain age, boys are taught how to tie a turban, and that is a rite of passage for their children, for the boys. Girls do not traditionally wear turbans, but they do wear scarves and veils over their head. Marriage is arranged by the parents. Women can only marry Sikhs, but it doesn't have to be somebody from their own caste system or their own caste level. Death is usually when the body's taken care of. When death comes, cremation is usually the way they dispose of their bodies. The body is washed, the body is dressed, the body is adorned with the 5 Ks, and we talked about those. But when the burial happens, women cannot enter the funeral grounds. The body is placed on a funeral pyre, and the oldest son or another friend or a relative lights the pyre if there's not an oldest son. Then the ashes are collected and they're buried or they are immersed in running water. Lastly, let's talk about Sikhs and women. Sikhs have maintained gender equality when it comes to spiritual liberation. Women can be just as spiritually liberated as men can, according to the Sikhs. Women are to participate fully in religious life. And still society, especially among the Sikhs, has for the most part been patriarchal. Go figure. We'll take a break. We'll come back and we'll start in on Shintoism, which is a religion that we find mostly in Japan. Okay, let's move on to the next religion, which is mostly a religion of Japan, and it is Shinto or Shintoism. So let's begin by discussing, if you will, the teachings of Shinto. The oldest surviving religion in Japan is Shinto, although it has been influenced, if you will, by other religions coming in, like Buddhism and Confucianism. The word Shin, S-H-I-N, refers to gods or deities. Literally, Shinto means the way of the gods. Shinto means the way of the gods. It was a term that came later in history to distinguish this religion from Buddhism. Kamanochi, capital K-A-M-I hyphen N-O hyphen M-I-C-H-I means the way of the kami. Kaminomichi. This is the core belief, if you will, of the Shinto religion. Kami is anything that is out of the ordinary. It is awe-inspiring. It is mysterious. It is beyond human control. There can be deities in Shinto. There are spirits. There are possibly people who have powers who deserve to be worshipped, they believe. Some natural objects in the world are so impressive in their appearance, like mountains and rivers and rocks and certain animals, that they believe that they might also be kami, Kami. The religion of Shintoism has no real identifiable founder, nor does it have a sacred text like we normally think of in many of the religions. It is based, if you will, on several highly revered writings. Kojiki, Kojiki, is one of those. It is a record of the ancient matters. The Nihon, Nihon, Shoki, Shoki, is the chronicles of the land where the sun rises. And both of these writings delve, if you will, into the ancient mythologies and into some of the ancient beliefs. Let's start with the creation myth, or the myth of creation. Izangi, Izangi, and Izanami, Izanami, were both creative deities. One was male and one was female. And the legend is, or the myth is, that they stood on top of this floating bridge in the heavens, and they dipped their jeweled spears into the ocean, and they pulled them up, and as the water dropped, as the water dripped into the oceans, islands began to form. And that kept on going until there were 8 grand islands which formed the country of Japan. But later on, the female Izanami gets burned when she's having her last child. Her last child to come out was the fire god, and it burned her completely. And the myth is that as Nagi, the male counterpart, goes to the underground to try to find his wife, but he is so repulsed by her burned up body that he retreats back to the surface, and he begins to wash his eyes in a stream. And from his eyes becomes the sun god, the sun goddess, August Kami, and the lunar god, capital Tsukiyomi. These were the things that came out of him washing his eyes. And from his nostrils came the storm god, and who had a violent temper, and his name was Susa no O. Susa, new word, capital N-O, last word O. Just know. And the storm god wreaked so much havoc on everything that the sun goddess retreated into a cave for a long period of time. And many believe that was the point in which the Shinto religion began to see, gave a reasoning for the eclipse, if you will. Many deities went to try to coax her out of the cave, and it was one deity by the name of Uzumi, Uzume, who went out in front of the cave and did a lewd dance and got everyone to laughing until the sun goddess came out to see what was going on, and therefore the sun came back. Japan so often is seen as a divine creation. The core belief of Shinto centers, if you will, around the kami, the Kami, Japan's unique relationship with them. Some of the majestic objects and a few of the animals in Japan are considered to be kami, such as mountains and waterfalls and the sun and the moon and foxes especially. Some kami are ill-tempered, and since they are ill-tempered, it was believed they had to be worshipped to appease them. For Shinto, Japan is the land of the kami, Kami. And the kami shares that this country of Japan is a paradise on earth. Now, let's talk for a second about fertility and purification. Early Shinto centered around fertility and purification. Death, disease, blood are all seen as something that pollutes the person. Anyone connected with these things is considered to be spiritually impure and therefore had to be eventually purified before approaching a kami and worship of some kind. So what happened was this would then produce some untouchables in society, and they performed some of the dirtiest jobs, butchers and tanners and undertakers. Now, this form of discrimination has been lifted a lot in our modern times, but it still hangs on a little bit. Let's talk about feminism, or feminine in Shinto. The sun, the most illustrious kami, is female. So it was not uncommon for an imperial ruler of Japan to also be female. And there were a lot of ladies who ruled Japan. They do have a role of ethics, the good and evil. In early Shinto, there was no reference to ethics. That's very interesting, but there was no reference to ethics. For the most part, morality was untouched by the early Shinto. There was no supreme God, according to them, who put emphasis upon morality and law. There is not even a hint in early Shinto of a problem or a struggle between good and evil. For Shinto, there was no evil entity. There was no Satan trying to subvert, if you will, the work of the creators. In truth, it was all based on impurities, and the remedy for those impurities was to purify oneself. Defilement before the gods is not a sin and does not produce guilt, nor does it produce polluting impurities. If you want to look at Japanese ethics at all, it relies heavily upon Buddhism and Confucianism. Let's talk about Shinto and imperial authority. Early Shinto drew a direct line between divine origin and the imperial family. The emperor or the empress, whichever one was ruling the country at that time, were considered to be divine descendants of the sun goddess, and her name was Amaterasu. Talk about the history of Shinto for a second. It can be divided into three periods: ancient Shinto, medieval Shinto, and modern Shinto. Ancient Shinto was a prehistoric, more or less, worship of nature. The kami became known and thought as people began to see more and more humans, they began to understand. Let's talk about medieval Shinto. During the time of Confucianism and Buddhism, this is the time it was introduced into Japan. And that really brought a jolt, if you will, to Shinto, and made believers begin to think maybe there were other ideals out there that couldn't be ignored, or maybe you needed to have an interest in them. So therefore, there came this sense of rivalry. Shinto reacted to the new religions with a sense of accommodation and in a sense of adaptation. Shinto embraced, that sounds weird, but it embraced, if you will, Confucianism moral principles. At that point, kamis, the gods, Shinto kamis, became guardians and protectors of the newly arrived Buddha and his manifestations. Convergence of Shinto, Buddhism, and Confucianism in Japan helped to create what is known as the samurai, Samurai, which it literally means sword-wielding warriors. And they had a tremendous code of conduct called the Bushido, and they were fiercely loyal to the royal family. Modern times, the modern period started when Shinto tried to recover its beliefs and those of the other traditions. Kokugaku is national learning. It became about in the 18th century, and people were saying we need to get back to our original Shinto beliefs. And there was this uprising of ultra-natural nationalism and imperialism and conflict. An emperor by the name of Meijii, who was only 15 years old, emerged from the shadows, and he would claim that he was God, or he had a divine right. And so therefore, from that point on, the emperor, whoever that was, the empress, were placed in the same level as a living kami, or if you will, God in the flesh. State Shinto blamed the fanatical nationalism that gave rise to Japan's involvement in World War II. Emperor Hirohito considered foreign aggression as a divine mission to be carried out without remorse and without hesitation. This brought on in World War II the kamikaze, the pilots who would just literally die for the sake of the country. Kamikaze literally means divine wind. Let's talk about Shinto as a way of life for just a second. Far more important than beliefs and ceremonies and ritual practices. Rituals allow believers to come into the presence of the kamis and bond with them. There were fertility rites. Kinensai as a festival to pray for the good harvest. Take fertility dispensing kami shrines to the fields where the people would dance and celebrate the spring event. You would take the shrines into the fields hoping that there would be a good harvest. Niname, Matsuri is the festival of harvest. And this is where the kami are honored and they are thanked for the harvest. What about the place of women in Shinto? Many powerful deities and kamis were female. And they still have what they call miko, M-I-K-O, who are unmarried women who go into the shrines, and they are the ones in the shrines who can communicate with the kami. And there are some fully credentialed, if you will, priestesses in the Shinto religion. There are rites of purification and presentation and petition and participation. The first steps are performed by the priests, while the last part involves the congregation and the people. Now, during this time, everyone has to be clean. Everybody has to be spiritually clean to encounter the kami. The second step is to offer food offerings to the kami. And there is a purification ritual that the Shinto priests carry out, which is called the Harae, H-A-R-A-E. The priest is dressed in ritual garbs or vestments, and they wave the onusa, O-N-U-S-A, which is a wand that's made of paper strips and evergreen branches, and they wave this as a way of appeasing the god, and it's waved from the left to the right, and then back to the left again. There's also the ritual bathing called misogi, M-I-S-O-G-I. It's usually a bathing that takes place under a waterfall or when one goes and immerses themselves in the ocean because the ocean is salty. Salt is sometimes used as purification. Sumo wrestlers often throw salt into the air as an act of purification. Food presentation for purification consists of rice, fish, fruit, wine, water, and salt, but absolutely no blood. There is the shrine, which is called the Jinja, J-I-N-J-A, is the dwelling place of the kami. And going there means that if you go to the Jinja, you have to purify your body and you have to purify your mind. The grand shrine at ISE, the grand shrine at ISE is the main sanctuary, is the main dwelling place of the sun goddess. But even people who believe in Shinto that are individuals, they also have their family shrines. Many homes in Japan have their own personal shrines. They do have religious observances, New Year, People clean out their houses and they get rid of all impurifications. And this is a major Shinto religious moment. The turn of the season, somewhere around February the 3rd, the last day of winter. Special purification is done by throwing, this is interesting, throwing roasted beans out the window into the yards. There's the Doll Festival, the Hina Matsuri, Hinamatsuri, which is around March the 3rd. It's devoted to the celebration of girls and daughters, and dolls are put on display for the day. There is the Boys' Day as well, and then we'll spell it Tangonosekku, which is around May the 5th. It is dedicated to the growth and the health of boys. There's the Star Festival, the Tanabata. It commemorates, and this is really cool, it commemorates the romantic story between two stars, Vega and Altair. There's the Ghost Festival, the Obon, O-B-O-N, which is where the families go to the grave sites of their ancestors and they clean the graves off. And then there's Harvest Day, or the Harvest Festival, the Niiname-SAI, which is around November the 23rd, and in modern Japan is known more as Labor Thanksgiving Day. So just for a second, let's talk about Shinto religion in today's world. After World War II, Shinto was for the most part abolished. The divinity of the Japanese emperor was disavowed. And the Shinto religion, although it's still practiced today, it's not much of a practice today. And it's really out there even now trying to entice new generations into the religion of Shinto. Okay, let's now move on to the last of our class tonight, which is Confucianism and Taoism. Now, Taoism is spelled Taoism, but it's pronounced Taoism. Both of these religions were born out of ancient Chinese religions. Confucianism focuses more on the interhuman relationships. Taoism represents, if you will, a relationship between humans and nature. So let's talk about the ancient religious views of these two particular religions. There was something called the Book of Changes, which had a worldview that might be categorized as organismic. Yeah, interesting word. Every single component of the cosmos belongs to an organic whole. In other words, everything that exists as a whole, and everything interacts with everything else. That's pretty much according to both religion. There is no creation myth in either of the religions, only an original state of undifferentiated chaos. And there are two polar but complementary energies known as Qi, and they mean breath, energy, force, and these energies are merged. Now, you might recognize these names very quickly. One is called Yang, which is the south-facing sunny side of the mountain. And the other is Yin, Y-I-N, as the north-facing side of the mountain. There's a shady or darker side of the mountain. The yin-yang is what we've probably come to understand it. And we know the picture of the yin-yang. It's a lot of tattoos show the yin-yang and all that other stuff. But that's what it is. That's where it comes from. The two together. When you put the two together, and it's kind of in art, if you will, when you put the two together, it shows the concepts of day and night, or male and female, or hot or cold. And these two energies interact continuously and ceaselessly to generate, if you will, a myriad of things in the process. And it also reminds people, the yin-yang also reminds people that nothing exists outside of the cosmos. According to these religions and according to this belief in the yin yang, there is no almighty creator. There is more of a procreation or a giving birth. It's more like creating from nothing, if you will. So, this gives humanity kind of a sense of release from guilt. The main emphasis for both religions is basically on harmony and balance. Disharmony and imbalance as the true culprits. The entire cosmos is involved in a ceaseless flow of alliteration and change. And if you look at the yin yang, that's kind of what it looks like. They flow together, so to speak. Let's start by talking about the teachings of Confucianism. All humans have a body, and the body is a manifestation of the interplay between yin and yang. But there are also within that two subdivided parts, the hun, H-U-N, and the po, P-O. The hun, again, represents the yang, or the light side, or the pure side. And the po indicates the yin, or the darker side of things. And these two, the hun and the po, come together in a fetus during gestation. And these are the things that makes up the spiritual aspect of a person. The hun and the po come together in the fetus and makes up the spiritual aspect of the being. Spiritual world of gods and ghosts is what we will take up next. At death, according to these two religions, as long as the energies remain as hun and po, the spirit of the deceased remains and lingers. Interesting. When one dies at a ripe old age, the spirit of that person might stick around as a shin, S-H-E-N, which is the power that helps out those who are still living. It's like not really a ghost, but a power that sticks around to help out those in their family, especially, who are still living. But if someone dies tragically, or if someone dies prematurely, they will become a Kui, Q-U-I, which is a vengeful, evil spirit or ghost. So, let's talk about political implications of these two religions. Shangdi, S-H-A-N-G-D-I, was the Lord on high in the Shang dynasty. And D-E was the power of the Shang king to rule with authority. Then came the Zhou, Z-H-O-U dynasty, and gave different names, if you will, to the highest deity. Shangdi, the highest deity in the Shang era, later became the Tian, T-I-A-N, or the force above. It became the highest force in that particular dynasty. Tian was, according to them, the source of all things, not as a creator, but more as a procreator. And Tian was not moved by blood ties. He was not moved by sacrifices. Tian insisted, if you will, on moral uprightness, and was as an award for political authority. In other words, you had to do the right things. The king was to rule on Tian's behalf as a morally upright person. Tian's workings in nature and the human world came through the Tao, the T-A-O, or the path, or the way. It is the Tao, T-A-O, of Tian that brings order and regularity in nature and in human society. The emperor, whoever it might be, was not only a political leader, they were also a religious figure who was, if you will, an intermediary of Tian. So, whoever the emperor was had to maintain a favor with Tian through what's called Li, L-I, Li rituals. which would convince the Tian that the emperor was moral and upright. Now, let's break off for a second and talk about Confucianism. Chinese refer to Confucianism as the teachings of Ru, R-U, which simply means scholars. Confucius brought these teachings to prominence and gave them religious meaning, but in truth, he was not the founder, nor was he ever worshipped, if you will, as a supernatural figure. But there were the analects of Confucius, writings, teachings of Confucius. They took various religious views and came up with the most important work, what they considered his most important work, which is the Lunyu, Lunyu, or they were the comments or the sayings of Confucius. And in this Lunyu, the Confucius made his comments, saying that these were religious texts, even though they weren't really religious. These teachings also give a kind of a fresh and innovative understanding of Tian. Tianming, Tianming, is the relationship between humans and Tian, especially those who are moral and morally elite. In Confucianism, Tian was more intimate. To Confucius, Tian reached out not just to rulers and not just to feudal lords. Tian reached out to the moral and the noble people, and from all backgrounds. Tian wanted to establish a moral order that had existed at one time. Tian allows perceptive people to detect the commands of Tian, making that person a messenger through which morality is spread, and eventually it uplifts society. Confucius believed that that's where everything lay. It lay in the teachings that would raise people up and raise society up. Tian, in the Analects of Confucius, is clearly the highest religious authority. But unlike Moses or Mohammed, Confucius did not see himself as a messenger of the personal God. Now, the content of Tian, or the content of Tian's imperative is the Tao, the Tao. Tian wishes to convey to the spiritual elite. This comes by way of the Tao, or the way. Confucius complained often that the Tao was never in practice. The socio-political order, with all of its proper rituals and behavior and public behavior, was not being done by the people in power. The rulers were not following the Tao. So Confucius said men of virtue and uprightness had to take upon themselves to protect, if you will, and preserve the ideal of the Tian, and the Tao, or civilization, would be doomed. He also believed in the Ren, R-E-N, which is the benevolence or humanness or virtue. And he said that there is a kernel of Ren that exists in every human being. And if someone can recognize that and preserve it and develop it, that they can be entrusted to do the work of Tian. When that is done, according to Confucius, the Tao will grow. Outside of the family, a person should interact with society with a sense of dutifulness. Then there's the Li, L-I. The Ren will not get it all done, according to Confucius. Inner goodness and benevolence has to be carried out, if you will, by prescribed behavior that comes through rites and rituals and normative behavior. Then there's the Junzi, J-U-N-Z-I. It is a noble person or a noble man of virtue who carries out in reviving and preserving, if you will, the Tao, the T-A-O. Now, the religious vision of the Analects, the teachings of Confucius, Confucius never really spoke about escaping this world or human society. For Confucius, afterlife was really of no concern. For Confucius, the ultimate goal of human beings was to follow the instructions of Tian and to be transformed from potential to actual goodness. Then came Master Ming, Meng, was born a full century after Confucius, but he claimed to be, if you will, the rightful successor to Confucius. And he had what he called the Mencius, Mencius. He also called for moral cultivation, and that was everyone's religious calling, is to be moral. Master Ming wrote the Mencius and proclaims there are four roots: the Ren, R-E-N, which means benevolence or goodness; the Yi, Y-I, which means righteousness; the Li, L-I, which means propriety; and the Zhi, which means wisdom, Z-H-I. The last two texts of Confucius' teaching talks about great learning, a practical step-by-step roadmap, if you will, for the self-cultivation of being a better person. It outlines the individual person and the social efforts for an ultimate good. But there's also the doctrine of the mean. What Tian has ordained is called human nature. And following that nature is called the Tao. And cultivating the Tao is called teaching. And according to this, there are 5 cardinal relationships. 1, father and son. 2, husband and wife. 3, elder and younger brother. 4, ruler and subject. 5, friends. Confucius, in his original vision, is to pursue personal relationships with other people, ultimate reality through moral improvement. This would become a culmination of a bettering of society and the state and everything around it, according to the Tao, which is the way of Tian. Now, for just a second, I want to share something about the ideal of Confucianism and women. Confucian, according to many historians, China and the birthplace of Confucianism was a very patriarchal society, and so therefore a lot of the ideas of Confucianism is also a very patriarchal outlook. So ladies, I'm sorry for that, but that's the way it was and the way it is. So let's for a second talk about the teachings of Taoism. Again, Taoism. It emerged from the same ancient Chinese religions as Confucianism. But instead of Tian being the ultimate absolute, Tao, T-A-O, is the supreme. The best known and most identifiable Taoists were Master Lao, L-A-O, and Master Zhuang, Z-H-U-A-N-G. Master Lao was more of a composite figure. Kind of, there probably really was a person, but they became bigger than life, and they really had all these different things written about him. He was the writer of the Tao Jing, which is T-A-O-D-E-J-I-N-G, which is the scripture of the way. It's the manifestations. The Tao Jing has 181 chapters. Confucian Tao is an ideal, ethical, social, political order ordained by Tian. For the Taoists, though, it is the Tao that is the basis of all human nature. It is the creator of all things. It is the Tao that gives birth like a mother. The ideal course of action for insightful, wise people is to observe the Wu-Wei, W-U-W-E-I. These are actions without intentions. just doing without needing something in return, and the Ziran, Ziran, which is natural spontaneity. The Wui, Wuwei, calls for a minimalist, non-interventionist attitude, just going with the flow almost. The Ziran rejects artificial or contrived actions, just doing something because you think you're going to gain something in return. Then there's the Jungazi, Zhuangzi. This is a sacred text. And in this text, the Tao, the Tao, is not only transcendent, but the Tao is also gives rise to all things. Everything comes from the Tao. Truly, it is the Tao that is the core of everything that ever exists, from the loftiest perfected beings to the broken tiles on the ground to even what one writer called excrement, doo-doo. Taoist deities. The Tao in later times became, for the Tao in later times, it became the Yuanshi Fianzun, which is Yuanshi, new word, Fianzun, or a celestial, venerable, or primordial beginning person. Taoists believe that if there are deities, they reside in all things, including human beings. They are there to protect the human being, especially if they're inside of the person. They're there to protect the major organs of the person from decaying. For a second, let's talk about Taoism and women. Taoism gives a better place to women in their religion compared to Confucianism, and a Taoist goddess plays a major role in their religion. Let's talk about the history of both religions for just a second, if you will. When Confucius was born, the whole world was in political chaos. He was born into a family where his father died when he was an infant, and he did menial labor to support his family, the only way they could make any money. But in that day, two groups of people grew into prominence. One were the Wushi, Wushi, which are the men of war, the knights of the feudal lords. They were the Wushi. Then there were the Rushi, Rushi. These were the scribes. These were the record keepers. And because of his desire for knowledge, Confucius, and there really was a Confucius, rose to the level of the Rushi. When China was finally unified as a state, Confucianism became a target of persecution. And it was during the Han Dynasty, the Han Dynasty, that Confucianism finally was lifted up and held to a higher honor, if you will. Of course, a Neo-Confucianism tradition arose and was found its way into Korea and Japan and Vietnam, even though you don't find that many Confucianists in any one of those countries nowadays. In the history of Taoism, the divination of Lao Tzu, somewhere in the 2nd century BC, led to the rise of Taoism. When they finally made Lao Tzu a divine, everything just kind of came together. And after that, a whole pantheon of deities came into being, if you will, and developed, and they were worshipped, and they were manifestations of the Tao. The Tao, the way, just somehow gave rise to all these different gods and goddesses. And like Confucianism, Taoism found its way through several countries throughout Asia. In modern times, honestly, Taoism has not fared well. From 1966 to 1976, during the Cultural Revolution in China, many of the Taoist shrines and the temples, they were destroyed. There has been some renewal of Taoism in mainland China, but not as much. as one would think. Confucianism and Taoism, even though they might not be big and as religions in those particular countries, they are still a part of the way of life of the people. I had a teacher when I was in seminary who said that Confucianism is still inbred in the Chinese people. There are some Confucian rituals. They place a great deal of emphasis on ritual and moral behavior. Also, there's a sacrifice to Tian that is given by the ruler. This involved 9 steps, including purification, dance, music, the reading of prayers and documents, and sacrifices. They also have family rituals in which they commemorate and they honor their ancestors. For Confucius, this was really core to one's humanity, if you will. But the Taoists also practiced rituals. For the Taoists, it always held that beliefs had to be put into action. You can't just believe, you have to do something about your belief. According to the Taoists, there is a need to promote communal living and stopping physical deterioration. Also for the Taoists, there are 2 rituals that I want to share. One is the Zhai, Z-H-A-I, which is several days of fasting, and the other one is Jiao, J-I-A-O, which is a rite of cosmic renewal. This is when this is a loud, colorful, and dramatic ritual which everybody participates in, and it gets pretty interesting anyway. That is tonight's class. I will be sending you the tests, the second test that we will take. I will be sending you this video. I will also be sending you the study guide for the tests. But the test that you should be getting will be over Buddhism and Sikhism. There won't be any tests over Shinto or Confucianism or Taoism. Or Jainism. It will be, excuse me, I am wrong. The test will be over Buddhism and Jainism, okay? I'm sorry. It will be over Buddhism and Jainism, but you should have a study guide coming to you with this particular video. Thank you all. I hope you all have a great week. Bye-bye.